Hello everybody and welcome to another Allsop podcast. This one is in respect of office leasing, the West End and the city markets. Is the value gap closing? With me today I've got Alice, Logan and Richard Townsend from our city and West End teams respectively. And let's get straight in. Alice, tell us a bit about your journey into this business.
Hi. So yes, my experience started age 16 at secondary school with my summer work experience, essentially. We were all tasked to go away and find a week's work somewhere. And luckily, my mum's a very good friend, who I call my sort of fairy godmother, my Auntie Shaz, she suggested I came to London to do a week with her at Wagamama's. And she was the head of restaurants there. And I had a really fun week travelling across the region, visiting lots of sites, getting the odd free Wagamama's. And so I really thought this working stuff is fantastic. That led nicely into Reading University, doing the real estate undergrad programme, and then into the JLL grad scheme in 2016, where I spent 7 years there. And last year joined the Allsop team.
Fantastic. And Richard, how about you?
Fairly similar in terms of it was a friend of my mum's who was a residential valuer up in Scotland, and he had a nice Mercedes-Benz that he drove around in, and he stuck damp meters into walls and just played a lot of golf. And I thought that looks like quite a nice job, which led me to the property degree up at Aberdeen University, and then milk ground job with DTZ, one of the big firms at the time. I did want to go to the Edinburgh office, but my accent was a little bit too Scottish for the Edinburgh property market at that point in time, so came down to London, and I've been here ever since, 24 years, which sounds mad, really. But
and still got that lovely Scottish accent.
Yeah, I don't think it's going anywhere, Ed, unfortunately.
Fantastic. Go on, shall we get straight into it, into the market? And, City and West End, obviously different geographical locations, but how do they differ? Where do we see the big differences? Is it the stock, the occupiers, the amenity? Where should we start?
I think the areas themselves obviously offer a lot of difference in terms of the buildings that are available. The West End, traditionally, because of planning, we can only have buildings that are so high and so big. So there's always been a squeeze on available stock in the West End. And the ability to develop new buildings is becoming harder as the planning regime changes over time. But up until quite recently, I think there's been a distinct difference. You either were a West End occupier or you were a city occupier. And I think that is something that we are starting to see change a bit more now.
And Alice, are you seeing the occupational piece in the city change? Is it going more sort of diverse?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite dominated by the banking and finance sector. And I think we saw sort of 60% of take-up early this year was from those occupiers. But it's diverse when you look at core versus fringe. As Rich has just mentioned, there is constrained supply in the West End. There's not the big floor plates there anymore. Development is limited for the bigger buildings. So we are starting to see more West End tenants come across to the city market.
And you can't, from my visits to the city recently, you can't get a place in a restaurant. The restaurants are busy. Is it back to sort of pre-pandemic sort of busyness on the streets, or how close are we to that?
I mean, the commutes are definitely getting busier. It does feel like we have emerged from the COVID period and it feels very normal.
And but in terms of the office stock, compared to the West End, you've got some big towers, some big floor plates. What are people after at the moment over there?
Best in class is definitely a trend. The flight to quality, best in class amenities, ESG, rich buildings. Occupiers can't get enough of quality. And I think that's just a prevailing theme across central London at the moment.
Do you think the quality is something that's always been there, or is it something that people now suddenly really want to see the very best? I mean, what's happening to all those secondary office buildings?
Well, in the West End, we are starting to see a lot more conversion to alternative uses in terms of hotels and residential where it's possible, but clearly that needs to be outside the central activities zone. So there are a lot of secondary buildings that are struggling to let. And I think that's, you look at the vacancy rates and they are kind of, 7.5%, 8% in the West End. But actually, when you take out all that secondary stock, that isn't really quite fit for purpose, it's down at kind of 1%, 2%, 3%, depending on the submarket. So there's that real rarity value to the best buildings, which is pushing up rents, which is why a lot of people kind of look at it and think, well, how can office rents be going up given everything that's happened over the last few years? But there's a real distinct difference between the best and everything else. And if you're not sitting in that upper category, there's quite a lot of vacant buildings that are going to need to be repurposed in some way.
So come on then, Richard, give us some stats then. Office rents are rising, they're going sort of higher and higher for that best stock.
Yeah, in the prime market, I mean, Mayfair you would always assume is the best market in the West End, and vacancy there is just around 3%, which is some way less than half across the whole West End. In terms of the top rent was actually achieved a couple of years ago now in 30 Berkeley Square, £277 per square foot.
That's crazy.
277, and we've seen a handful of deals over £200 a foot in recent years. The biggest, most publicised one is obviously Blackstone taking pre-let of Lansdowne House, which isn't ready until 2027. They did this probably 18 months ago now. Their global rent there is something approaching £40 million a year, which sounds like a huge number, but if you're Blackstone and hundreds of billions of pounds of profits, it's actually relatively not that big a sum to be in the best building in the best market when there really isn't much else coming through over the next few years in the core.
Would Berkeley Square be considered the best location, or St James's Square?
Historically, Berkeley Square has always been probably considered the best. My personal view is that it is starting to move slightly north towards Hanover Square, just because I think Crossrail has become such a big pool and a real kind of step change for the market in terms of access to Crossrail, and getting people into central London has really, really made a huge difference with the Elizabeth line. And I also think a lot of modern occupiers want to be near that more lively Soho amenity, so just crossing Regent Street is a bit easier than coming from Berkeley Square. But clearly, Berkeley Square, St James's Square, I've got that cachet that's just never going to wane. There's always going to be people wanting to be on those best squares in London.
So just coming back to that then, the best rent over £200, sort of standard grade A space in Mayfair would be?
Yes, Cat A rent now is probably 135 for a kind of standard middle floor in a building. But clearly, as you get closer to the top of buildings and roof terrace amenity and everything else, we see a lot of deals now kind of in around 170, 180. We also see some smaller units that have been well fitted by landlords, and the rents on those, which used to be kind of £80 to £90 a foot, because they've been well fitted speculatively, we're now seeing them well into the hundreds as well, and that's been another big change over recent years.
We'll come on to fitted in a bit, but let's go back to Alice, and in terms of the city, where are rents now in terms of the best buildings?
So the city prime rent is £79.50. So that has increased from mid-70s about 12, 18 months ago. So it's on an upward trajectory. We are seeing a lot of demand, as I mentioned, for best in class, the towers. They kind of create their own markets. We're seeing extremely strong leasing momentum and strong rents being achieved at 40 Leadenhall, 8 Bishopsgate, 22 Bishopsgate, for instance. That kind of insurance district, tall buildings, tower floors, great views, great amenities are definitely commanding great activity and strong values.
Where's the vacancy rate sitting at the moment?
Vacancy rate is starting to fall. It's fallen on the second consecutive quarter. Across central London, it's 8.8%. So that's still above the long-term average of 5.8%. And we're seeing a contraction in refurbished and second-hand space falling, so respectively 1.9% and 5.5%, which is good. And that new build supplies, it's still quite constrained, sitting at 1.5%, which is only marginally above the long-term average of 1%.
So it's all looking fairly positive, isn't it? And what about that, coming back to the second-hand market, where do you see that going at the moment?
It's been a challenge, as we've mentioned. Demand since COVID has really been for best in class, and occupiers are willing to spend more on their real estate. A lot of companies contracted slightly, but now feels like it's levelling out. People are having more space, more areas of amenity in their offices, using them like a sort of a hub. And therefore, second-hand space, it didn't have much of a spotlight on it, let's say. But this year, we are starting to see more interest in grade A minus, maybe upper class of grade B, refurbished spaces or slightly older buildings which are getting more interest. I would say they're on the periphery of the core markets, so where there isn't the stock, occupiers are looking at what's next. We have put a few deals under offer in the city office recently. I wouldn't say it's quite as much as budget is back, but it's looking a bit more positive for grade B.
And where do you think, as a question for both of you actually, the office market obviously changed over the pandemic and the aftermath as to how people occupy space. Are we seeing the hot desking thing, the hybrid working? Is there a complete range of options that people are using, or are you starting to see trends in the West End?
I think it's very organisationally dependent and sector specific. I think you've seen the tech market really, really move away from offices. I mean, you look at Facebook kind of putting their whole campus at Rathbone Square on the market, getting on for 300,000 square feet, which they've consolidated into other buildings that they have. But already that space has been on the market for about 3 months, and they've already got half of it under offer to a kind of another tech business. But tech definitely has moved far more towards a hybrid working, and they're not needing as much office space, nowhere near as much. But for finance, and I would say for media, we went through a while of them not coming back to the office, but I think now we're starting to see they're really seeing the benefit of being creative industries, being in an office together and actually really collaboratively working in a way which you just can't do at home. And so we're definitely seeing a lot more of those creative businesses coming back into the office and committing to new spaces. And as Alice said, maybe not as much, traditional desk space, but in terms of collaboration areas and amenity for staff, taking as much space, but just less for sitting down at a desk.
And you're seeing that in the city, Alice?
Absolutely. When we host viewings, we always ask that question. How many days are you in the office? What does your occupancy levels generally look like? And I would say it's a 3 to 4 day working week for most. And most company heads will find that their staff come in on the same days. So it's not as if they're taking any less space. But it feels like the onus is back into the office for the social sort of collaboration, growth and development angles. I think it's around to stay now. I
think, building culture, building togetherness, creativity, there's nothing like being together, is there? But, I suppose the hybrid piece is important. And another question for you is the ESG agenda, which is obviously huge at the moment and increasingly so in terms of, occupier requirements. How high up the list is that when you talk to people?
I think for the larger occupiers, ESG is as important as finding outdoor space. It is generally driven by the corporate agenda, but also employees care about the real estate that they're occupying, and therefore it's ingrained in the development of a building, the marketing of it, the messaging. Net zero, it's definitely a topic that people are more aware about now and have a much better understanding of.
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of businesses, like a professional services business or whatever, the building you're in is one of the few ways you can really meet your environmental targets as a business. And so it's become hugely, hugely important. And even for smaller occupiers now, we've got deadlines coming up in terms of a building needs to be above EPC C before otherwise you're not going to be able to occupy it properly. And, these things are a worry for occupiers because these changes aren't too far away. In buildings that need investment, it's going to be difficult to avoid that investment for much longer if you want an income-producing building moving forward.
Well, and I think, our experience as a provider of professional services, we're constantly being asked when we sign contracts to provide services, what we're doing about ESG. And it's, on everybody's demand list in terms of, the suppliers and what they're doing. So you can see why it's such an important thing. So we've talked about rental levels. The demand is clearly there. But what about the supply? The supply in the pipeline? Are developers getting out there and prepared to spend money yet and refurbish or develop space in any great quantity, or are they continuing to see the sort of move away to other alternative uses?
Well, I think this is probably where the markets do differ a bit. I think in the West End, we've got a real kind of supply problem moving forward for a number of reasons. Build costs, etc., have been high for a little while now, although they are now steadying, but it's clearly not as cheap to build a building as it once was. That combined with interest rates, that combined with lower valuations on assets is really making a lot of developments and a lot of developers think hard about, can they feasibly push the button, even with the positive rental story that we have. Because if you do push the button on these buildings and build them, we've seen in the West End that the vast majority of them, 85% of the buildings are getting pre-let. But still, there are a good number of schemes that are just sitting there in the West End at the moment, and no one's quite pushed the button, and that is leaving us with a bit of a pinch on supply over the next couple of years. And I think it's not going to get any easier with the protracted kind of planning situation that Marks and Spencer's have been going through their building, in terms of having to go through retrofit first and making buildings fit for purpose, which is absolutely correct. But it does mean that just building new buildings in the West End is challenging, and particularly with the constraints we already have around kind of floor plate size and how high you can build fundamentally, it does mean that there is a supply shortage.
I suppose the question is, how high do rents need to get to make schemes viable, whether it's new build or refurbishment?
Yeah.
And I suppose some of those better quality locations, you're seeing rents past £100 and it's starting to work.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we said, £100 used to be a benchmark, and it was solely focused on Mayfair and St James's. I mean, this year alone, we've had over 25 deals over £100 a foot, and I would say probably 2/3 of those have been outside Mayfair and St James's. They've been in Soho, they've been in Fitzrovia, really good submarkets that people want to be in, and actually, drawing occupiers that you maybe would have only considered as Mayfair St James's occupiers into more contemporary locations. So again, I think that's been a real change in the market. We're seeing occupiers looking at locations that they would never have done 5 years ago.
That's interesting. Alice, what's the story in the city?
In terms of the active demand, there are a lot more 50k plus requirements this year than there has been in previous years. And that is definitely putting some pressure on the pipeline stock coming through. We're seeing occupiers look way in advance of their lease events and committing to big pre-lets. So we saw Citadel's pre-let deal of 2 Finsbury Avenue in April, where they took 250,000 square feet. So a huge transaction there. I think that's making occupiers sort of wake up and realise that they do need to be out earlier, because there are more limited buildings coming through, given the cost of construction and where these rents need to be.
Are you seeing more developers starting to take action, or is it still the residential, the co-living that's taking priority?
In the city market, I would say there's less of that change of use. I still think it's predominantly these buildings are being refurbished and remaining as offices, but perhaps in more fringy areas, the change of use is more apparent. I definitely think the geography of central London is contracting as opposed to widening.
One area of the market that seems to be developing at a pace is the advent of flex space, Cat B fit outs, fitted space. Where do you see that market going, Alice?
The flex market is entwined with the conventional market. It is only going that way. So pre-COVID, the Cat B phenomenon was growing. Landlords would deliver sub 5,000 square foot floors in a turnkey condition, and they would generally be let on a conventional lease. Now, with the rise of flex and occupiers graduating from true flex, so I mean serviced offices, they are stepping up into fitted spaces, but they're seeking, managed services or fully encompassing day one rent. So the market has had to evolve. to cater for managed deals and all just fitted deals without those added on premiums.
And clearly landlords are able to charge more rent, which makes it worthwhile. Is there a sort of a cap on the sort of levels that landlords are charging, or is it just whatever people are prepared to pay?
I think it's ultimately, if you don't fit a building out that's sub 5,000 square feet and probably maybe even higher than that now, you're not going to let it, frankly. And Alice and I have been involved with the building quite recently together, where we had 2 fitted floors at the bottom of the building and we had 2 Cat A floors further up the building, and the 2 fitted floors have let pretty quickly, and the Cat A floors, frankly, we're really struggling to get any interest on at all, and so the landlord is now going to roll into fitting these things out, and that is just fundamentally where the market is for the vast majority of submarkets, in terms of occupiers are willing to compromise on getting maybe not exactly what they want, but it's there and it's ready for them.
Well, I suppose there's a benefit in actually seeing what you're getting. You can you present the space, it's there, it's ready to go.
It's that residential show home kind of sales, really. That's basically what it is. We managed to operate in the market previously where we didn't really have to do too much, and I think it's become a real skill of agents moving forward. We do have to do a fair bit of interior design now that we didn't have to do before, and some of us are better at that than others. But it has become vital for a huge majority of our everyday market, particularly in the West End. The vast majority of our market is deals sub 10,000 square feet. We spend a lot of time talking about the big deals, but the huge majority of our market is smaller deals, and that is become just the driver of it. And if you're not on board, you're going to sit with a very long vacancy.
Survival of the fitted, they may say.
Yes, indeed. And landlords are clearly prepared to roll up their sleeves and get busy. The days of sitting back, 25-year lease and doing nothing, that's a rare thing, I should think, nowadays.
Definitely. Leases are getting shorter, and the Cat B floors, they used to be sub 5,000. They're only growing, and in the city we're seeing cases of 15,000 square foot floors being delivered turnkey, generally where there's compromised floor, limited views. We are seeing that these turnkey floors that are fully dressed and look like show floors do help with the vision. And as Richard has mentioned, there is a very limited market for Cat A for the smaller floors. We are seeing values reducing in certain areas. Generally speaking, there is a premium for fitted. There is more supply of fitted, so that generally will, put pressure on the lower quality fitted floors being delivered. But anything that is really high quality is seeing a premium up to £10 per square foot in some cases. And we're seeing some really strong evidence being created in the city and in the fringe of smaller floors being let in the 90s, which is a very strong rent for city.
It's clearly the way forward, isn't it, in terms of, yes, there's more work to do, but the rewards are there. So come on, let's talk about some favourite buildings. What's your favourite building, Alice, that you've been to see recently?
That is a really hard question, and I've been thinking about it for a while, and I have maybe half a dozen favourite buildings. I can't run through all of them on this podcast, but the Canifham 70 St Mary Axe has to be one of my favourites. It was a building I was involved in early on. It's got stunning architectural form, these lovely linear curves, a reception like no other. And they filmed The Apprentice there in 2019. And that was a show that really made me fall in love with the city and these amazing tower buildings. I also really love the Row and 1 Finsbury Avenue for its art installations. So an artist called Yinka Ilori, who's designed a lot of the artwork at Battersea Power Station, was involved with the common parts interiors. In 1 Finsbury Avenue, the artwork is essentially a cafe kiosk where they serve coffee and pastries. And at the Row, he designed a stunning ceiling for the wraparound communal terrace. Very colourful and different. Essentially, it gives the building a real identity. And then third and finally, a building I'm working on now within Norton Folgate. It's number 15 Norton Folgate, designed by Morris and Company. Stunning Victorian architecture, retained features, lovely chimney pots. And this building was once home to London's oldest zoo, which burnt down in the late 1800s and was home to bears, seals and monkeys. Very random fact, but the original features have been retained. I think that makes it so quirky and it has a real personality.
Fantastic. The thought of bears and seals and monkeys, and hopefully not so many bears around nowadays. But anyway, there we go. Richard, what about you?
I would say for me, there's a building, Seven Dials Warehouse in Covent Garden on Earlham Street, which is a kind of a large converted warehouse just next to Seven Dials. We ended up pre-letting that to Red Bull at the time. It's a fantastic building, retained all the character. It was one of the first buildings where, modern contemporary design really kind of took a step forward. It had an enormous roof terrace with great views. Red Bull, as part of their fit out, kind of dropped in a full replica of an F1 car into the building. There was a kind of a cherry picker kind of dropping this F1 car into the building, which is pretty cool. But yeah, I've always thought that was a fantastic building. Recently a building we've been working on is 31 St Petersburg Place, which is down in Bayswater, which is not a traditional office location at all, but it was originally a dairy built in the late 1800s and subsequently was occupied as an office by Omnicom. They moved out and we've been letting it on behalf of the landlord ever since. It's currently a show suite for the big Whiteley's residential development, but the bones of that building and how it operates, I think, is really, really impressive. And it's in a lovely location right next to two churches, a Greek Orthodox church and another church next door. It's a really, really pretty little environment down there. So it's one of my favourites as well.
Fantastic. I mean, London has such a rich tapestry of buildings. Let's talk about the fringes and the core markets and the different bits. Obviously, in the city, you've got Shoreditch, Aldgate, Canary Wharf. West End is King's Cross, Paddington, perhaps. Where's going to perform going forward, do we think? Some of those fringes have sort of regressed a little bit over recent years, but perhaps are they coming back?
We're seeing a sort of effect happening more in the fringe and neighbouring submarkets. In the city, Shoreditch definitely has a lot of development supply. North of Liverpool Street, we're seeing really high rents being quoted at new schemes. The Folgate building, Norton Folgate. Aldgate was relatively subdued during COVID, but has been a hive of activity recently. It's had lots of demand from the educational sector due to the dual planning permissions. And Canary Wharf, they've really asset managed that estate. There's a great ESG story, amenity story. Revolut have recently committed to YY, pre-leasing 113,000 square feet, expanding from 80,000 in West Ferry, which is a great accolade for Canary Wharf.
That's an amazing story for Canary Wharf, isn't it? Because there was a time when we really thought that area was in real trouble. But it's clearly coming back.
Yeah, I mean, from the West End side of things, King's Cross has clearly been a huge success story, and there's just anything that comes available up there seems to let very, very quickly. It's been really interesting watching the Google landscraper kind of be developed. I don't quite know what happens when someone at one end of that office wants to speak to someone else. It probably takes about half an hour to walk the length of that floor plate, but a phenomenal location. Paddington, interestingly, when the Elizabeth line was in the planning, I thought Paddington might suffer as a result, because Paddington's big driver was always access to Heathrow, and I thought, that might change things. But actually, Paddington's just gone from strength to strength. There's some of the biggest deals that have happened in recent years have occurred up in Paddington, and the rents there now are kind of, they've achieved over £90 a foot there quite recently, which, for a fringe market like that, I think is pretty impressive. So those markets have gone very well. Midtown's quite an interesting one. It's been a really tough time in Midtown, I would say, post-pandemic. But definitely in the last 6 months, we've started to see a lot more activity coming back with a really high base of student occupation there. The office market really just seems to be starting to motor there now. We've seen lots of diverse occupiers coming in, and it still demonstrates reasonable value. I mean, you can still get some of the best space there in the kind of early 70s, which, you know, feels like very, very good value when you're right next to Covent Garden and Bloomsbury, etc. So yeah, I think that's a market that's going to continue to improve.
So just to round up, one last thing. What's your favourite bit about the job at the moment? The favourite viewings? What do you guys enjoy?
I mean, one of the best things about the job is the people that you meet day in, day out from all sorts of different businesses and different walks of life, and it's really interesting hearing about people in their businesses and what drives them. Personally, for me, the best viewing I did was I actually showed Sol Campbell around a building, the ex-England footballer, and he was just coming to the end of his career, and he was looking at setting up a business, and so I showed him around a building in Kensington. But I spent most of the viewing trying to convince him to come out of retirement to play for Dunfermline Athletic, which sadly he declined, and he didn't take the office space either. So it wasn't successful in the end, but it was very good to meet him. He's a very nice guy indeed.
Big fellow.
Yes.
And popular in some parts of North London and not others.
Yes, indeed.
I've sadly not met anyone famous in the 8 years I've been doing office viewings, but I do really enjoy meeting creative businesses. I find that very inspiring. We had Stephen Bartlett on the road in the Fringe recently, who hosts the Diary of a CEO podcast. That was very exciting. I narrowly missed out on showing him a building, but I did find that very cool that he was looking for a warehouse building. Mob Kitchen, who are the Instagram curators of food. They have their own recipe book. I showed them around a building in Islington. Again, really great to meet these people who've built very successful startups.
Fantastic. And just to finish off, the comparisons, the conclusions, West End and City, what would you draw from our chat today?
I mean, I feel like the markets are probably closer than they've ever been in terms of occupier base. You see it the way that a lot of firms are set up now in terms of central London offering, because you can get occupiers that will look across central London. It's all about the building, really. And so I think, whilst, you know, there is still obvious rental differentials between the top rents in each market, I think outside of that, the rest of the market has become quite homogeneous, and there isn't huge differences in a lot of the submarkets. So I think, it's each market is developed in its own way, but they're offering ever better things for occupiers, which can only be good.
And certainly more diversity.
Yeah.
What do you think, Alice?
I think the main thing is the Crossrail connection has just joined the city to the West End and vice versa. Occupiers, they're driven by the same building merits.
I think you're right. It's amazing how busy Crossrail has become, you know, the Elizabeth line as we call it, how busy that is, you know, from the get-go. Just to wrap up, thank you to Richard Townsend and Alice Logan for their thoughts this afternoon. I think, you know, certainly that London is more diverse than ever. The market is incredible in just how strongly it's coming back, and you know, people love London, and the market is demonstrating that. Thank you for listening to this podcast. If anybody wants to get in touch with Richard, Alice, or myself, Ed Dunningham, you know, please do get in touch through the Allsop website or on LinkedIn, and we look forward to you listening to the next episode. Thank you.